No pressure. Hi everyone. Hello family. Um, I'm really happy to be with you all. The room looks a lot bigger today. I don't know why. Maybe because when you stand here it looks bigger. I'm really excited to share this topic with you. To be honest, I would have loved to hear this talk. Um, and the first thought I had when I was asked to do it was, I wonder why they asked me to talk about it. And my first thought was, I kind of have a very bad relationship with my phone, and I put this status on one time. I've never received so many messages ever to anything I ever posted. And it basically says if you can't read it. If you ever need me, I'm always just 3 missed calls and 4 text messages away. Got a really bad relationship with my phone. So I tend to keep people waiting sometimes, not on purpose. But I thought, oh, this is a good chance for me to selfishly say I'm really sorry if I've ever kept you waiting. Um, but I think sometimes we think this is what God says. If you persist, don't worry. I'm only a few calls and a few text messages away. That's not Him. God's always there. He's there within a moment. He's there all the time. And just because He keeps you waiting or you feel like you're waiting doesn't mean that He's not with you. So I just wanted to clarify that's me, but that's not Him. So I thought I'd start off by asking the room, what is a season of waiting and how does it feel? If it's okay with you, just a little bit of sharing. I don't want you to get too tired too early from my voice. Any thoughts? What is a season of waiting? Thank you.
I thought that I was so bad because when I was telling anyone now, and he won't give me money.
We'll sort that out, don't you worry. We'll make sure they do.
I was going to say when you ask for something from God for so many times, and it feels like He's not even saying yes or no, He's just not answering.
Okay. So lack of an answer.
But what? Because I brought some cupcakes for sale now. He don't. He couldn't give me money.
Waiting in action. Bless you.
Yeah, I know, like maybe sometimes you've been promised something by someone, or there is something you want, and like sometimes just there's gonna be a bit of time, maybe a big bit of time between, you being told you're gonna get something and you're actually arriving to. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm not the most like well-versed person when it comes to like biblical stories, but I'm pretty sure there's stories of like kings and stuff that are told they're anointed in the future, like yeah, and then it's a big amount of time that these things happen,
Absolutely.
and even like
Yeah.
oh yeah.
No, please go.
I don't know, even with like I don't know, like the story of Abraham and everything as well, like they're given promises and there's a big time limit waiting. And in terms of how does it feel, I feel like I know it's so much easier kind of now because we've got like all these stories telling us like how faithful God is and like, how faithful He's been to people that are, like that have yeah faith in Him, and it's like so we've almost got like a blueprint like of all the promises and how faithful He is, and I'm sure we've all got like examples in our own lives and things we've seen as well. So I feel like mm, no, like waiting, like sometimes now, like whenever I'm waiting, like I'm in seasons of waiting all the time now, and um, like yeah, it's just it. I feel like right now it's like you're almost given a chance to show how much faith you have and how much trust you have in God. So it's almost like yeah, it's like you're in a test, but like it's a good test. I digress.
No, really good. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, you should have given the talk, really. No, that was brilliant. So, a few of the many deep things you said, fulfillment of promises, there'll be trials, lots of biblical examples. There's a purpose to it. I mean, yes, that is the talk in what you said. Well done.
I think seasonal waiting is basically preparation. in order for like the thing that you're actually wishing or praying for that you probably want to have in the future, whether it be career, university, marriage, etc., etc. What it often feels like is lesson after lesson after lesson, but it's a building block to help you grow spiritually. So it's all about growth as well.
Amazing. Genuinely, I think you guys looked at the slides. Lovely. I agree. And I think sometimes the lesson keeps repeating until we get it. God's a very patient teacher. You don't usually move on to the next lesson until you get the first one. Is there another one?
So how I like to envision the season of waiting is when, like, if God gives someone else in your circle a limousine but gives you the bus, are you still going to be just faithful? This is just like very like broad, like in terms of like like analogy, and it's just kind of like it feels like everybody around you is getting what they prayed for, getting what they've worked for, but then like God is like not listening to you. He's not around. You feel like his presence is missing around you, and then it's all just trying to like build up our faith. Like how long can you just trust in God's plan? And there was this Bible verse I received during one of the feast nights. I randomly picked it up and it resonated with me, and it said like God's time is the only perfect time. And yeah, that is what season of waiting is for me.
Thank you. I'm gonna take that from you. Season of the bus rather than the limousine. I think what I take from it is sometimes waiting isn't about us. It's about us, and it's about how you fit into the greater collective. But I love what you said. Thank you. To be honest, we probably don't need the next slide. I tried to brainstorm some things in case we didn't come out with much as a group, but I think we picked up quite a few things. Um, so I thought maybe we would pick up that waiting is an answer to prayer, which we said. It's when we're wanting clarity on our purpose, fulfillment of a promise, which I think David said. We can experience it in different areas of life, career, studies, healing in all its forms. When we ask God, what's next? When we're waiting for something, be it a relationship or marriage or children, any promise from God that we feel hasn't reached fulfillment. Those are commonly the things we think about when we think about waiting. I mean, you guys are far more spiritual than me, but I put for me sometimes how it can feel. It can feel a bit slow, feel a bit uncertain, it can feel discouraging sometimes, um, frustrating. It can sometimes feel like a lack of action, a period inactivity or feeling forgotten. I don't know if that's what my sister there was kind of hinting to. There's a lot of things to unpack during a season of waiting. Um, and I think it's important not to ignore these feelings because they impact the season and its length and its function. I think we need to be very real and very honest about our feelings. Um, and I think sometimes that's why it's important to find one or two people and your father of confession as a safe space to talk through your seasons of waiting. Because you need to feel heard. You need to know that you're not forgotten. And sometimes it takes a bit of openness to get that clarity, I think. Is it wasted time? Is waiting wasted time? I'll take one comment maybe from the crowd if anyone's got a thought about this. Mina. Mina.
I think it can feel like that, but it isn't.
I love that. I love that. Drop that mic. Brilliant. Oh, sorry for the formatting. I agree with you, but I think you said it very eloquently. Waiting is not wasted time. Waiting can sometimes be a place as well as a season. That place can be God's nursery, and I mean nursery from the point of view of a plant, a place where things grow, a classroom where God teaches us things, a clinic where He heals us, and also a boardroom where He sits you down and tells you your purpose, the plan, and what He's going to use you for. Maybe not all together in one go, but there will be direction in a season of waiting. I don't know why I included this, but I thought of waiting. I thought of the Four Seasons Hotel. Like, you really love staying in the Four Seasons Hotel, but you don't think of it as home. Okay? If I had the right attitude to waiting, I would think of it as being a place where I am accommodated, I am taken care of, someone's paying the bill, there's a plan to it, there's different places to go, and it's got different functions. But this life, we are in a Four Seasons hotel. This isn't home. The whole of life is a season of waiting till we ultimately, through God's grace, go home to Him. So I challenge you to see your whole life potentially as a season of waiting to what awaits, to what's eternal. And if I allow God to do His full work, it's a time of transformation. I am transformed through waiting. And it's a time of revelation where I learn more not only about God, but by knowing Him, I learn more about myself. The church fathers say to truly understand humanity, it has to be done through the eyes of divinity. I can't really understand what it means to be a person or a human until I get to know God. And the best place to do that is in a season of waiting. And even when we're a bit rebellious and we run from God, God is so sovereign, He will use those things. He will use those moments. But it can affect your season of waiting. In conclusion, about what it is, season of waiting is a God-ordained and permitted period of time that's under His authority and His sovereign hand for His purposes and plan for you, humanity, and creation. So not just for me. It isn't so insular that it's just about me. It's a period of time where God's at work, even if we don't see it or feel it, but we can trust it, which is what Mina's saying. So, what's a good example? David was saying we've got lots of examples in the Bible, so our example that we're going to focus on today is the most amazing person ever, Moses. He was a man whose entire life, I think, was marked by long seasons of waiting. I didn't really realise this until I had to prepare for this talk, so I've really learnt a lot about him. And through his life and his story, we really learn that there are different seasons of waiting. They're not all the same. And they're not about inactivity and inaction. They're about preparation, which you said. So, he lived 120 odd years. He really waited. He really waited. His first 40 years, we know, he was in Egypt, and it was a time of growing and discovering his identity. The second 40 years, he was in Midian. He was hidden in obscurity, and he was discovering at that time God's identity, albeit maybe all of a sudden. The last 40 years, he was in the wilderness, leading and loving a really stubborn bunch of people. But he was also discovering their identity through the eyes of God and the plan that he had for them. He became friends with God, and he never physically entered the land, the promised land that he was told was for the people. I'm not going to go into every single detail of his life because I know we know the story of Moses, but I'm going to try and pick out little sections. Okay? Everyone okay so far? Yeah.
You go back a slide. Why did you say not physically entering? So
Yeah.
he enters spiritually.
Yeah, so if we've got time, I was hoping to go through that at the end. Astute, very astute. Yes. If we've got time, there's a little contemplation that I'd like to go through actually with the help of a hab. Oh, I'm going backwards, guys. Just a very quick meditation. A lot of theologians contemplated on the meaning of the number 40. I found it really interesting that his life was split into 40s. And it has multiple symbolic meanings. Preparation, transformation, trials, repentance, escape from bondage. When I was reading, all these things are caught up in the number 40. I read somewhere else that if you really wanted to make a serious change in your life, try and do it for 40 days in order for it to really catch a hold not only of you mentally and physically, but spiritually. And it made me think, gosh, is that why Lent is 40 days? Is that why our Lord Jesus Christ fasted for 40 days? Is that why Moses, before receiving the law, fasted for 40 days? There's meaning in everything. There's meaning in everything. So I just wanted, this is a little side note, that there is meaning behind the amount of time that you spend in a season. Even if it's not exactly 40, there is meaning. So, the first season of beloved Moses' life. So, the waiting season in Egypt. I didn't put the whole story down because I know you know it, but starts off, Moses is born, he's hidden for 3 months, then he's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. In Acts, he's also mentioned as being someone who grew up in Pharaoh's palace, educated in the wisdom of Egypt, yet he was also a Hebrew by birth, and that was revealed to him and to all. And it made me think, how did Moses feel about his own identity in those first 40 years? Who is he? Is he a prince of Egypt or a son of Israel? Is there a lot of duality there? How do you hold that?
No.
Did he have like a crisis of understanding of who he is? To be honest, if he didn't, I'd be surprised. But I think sometimes we grapple with that, especially in our type of community where we live in the West, but we have really beautiful, rich Eastern roots. I remember when I was growing up, because I feel like I've done my growing physically. We stopped quite early. But I always ask myself that, am I Sudanese Egyptian? Am I British? Am I this? Am I that? That takes a season of waiting to work through. Coming to that place of self-identity, self-actualization takes time. And I think for Moses, he had a lot of growth. He had a lot of conflict of identity towards the end of his first 40 years. But God was building him up for a really spiritual purpose. At age 40, he acted a bit hot-headedly, and maybe using his own power and his own authority that he'd grown accustomed to as a prince of Egypt. He killed an Egyptian in an attempt to save one of his own, and maybe wasn't really very convicted of that when he did it. He was still quite strong within himself until he saw two of the men of Israel having a fight, and then he was called out and he said, "Are you going to kill me too, the way you killed the Egyptian?" And then the weight of conviction hit him, and maybe the weight of fear. And he realized he had stepped way above his authority. So fearfully, he ran away. And with that, I think he realized he wasn't ready to lead. Even though he thought initially he might have been. I think we do this quite a lot. I think I do this quite a lot. Where I take on things thinking I'm ready, and I use my own power, my own authority, my own, what I think God-given skills. And even if it's the right purpose, because he was meant to lead the people of Israel, but he did it in his own strength, in his own time, without waiting on God for the next step. And you realize really quickly, I'm not doing it God's way, I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it in my own power. So I think God is really good in this sense that when we go through this, he blesses us with a season of waiting to rectify all of the wrong thinking that I carry around, all of that hot-headedness, that inability to wait on him, to ask him, what would you want me to do? What does this mean? What's your plan? Can I work with you? Rather than doing it the other way around, doing something and saying, God, could you just bless that? Because I've stepped out already. I think one of the things I just wanted to try and add in at every section, God's always working. If you take nothing else, in your seasons of waiting, God is always working. And he probably did more than the things that I put on this slide. But during this time of Moses' life, Sweetie pie. He definitely saved Moses from death from the river. He allowed him proximity to his family despite being adopted into Pharaoh's family. He gave him access to the best education, leadership training, cultural understanding within the world's most leading community at the time. He positioned him really strategically to confront Pharaoh at a later point. Basically, he gave him a head start without Moses knowing he was going to have a head start at a later point in the story. I popped in 2 verses at every junction when we think about God working. One from Old Testament, one from the New. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to read them out to you and try and, as well as you can, hold all the verses in your mind till we reach the end, okay? So from Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And from Romans. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Okay? If Moses knew those 2 things at that point, I think it would have really comforted him, because that must have been quite a scary juncture in his life. Now I'm just going to, if it's okay, give you a minute or two. Just try and talk to the people next to you, if that's okay. And I just want you to contemplate some of these things. Have you ever felt stuck between 2 identities? Maybe more than 2, but at least 2. Many of us rush into things before we're ready, be it in career, relationship, or ministry. How do you recognize that that's what you're doing? And why do you tend to do that? Think of a moment in your life when God's timing was less to do with haste and more to do with your preparation. And the final reflection, how can we trust that God is shaping us when we feel uncertain about our identity and purpose? It's a lot to think about. Maybe pick the one that's most pertinent or hits home for you. But if you don't mind, take a minute or two, talk to the people around you, and then I'll bring you back. We're not going to share it out loud, but it just gives you a chance to reflect. Okay? Do your thing. I know I've hardly given you any time. I know I've hardly given you any time, but I might bring us all back together again. I might bring us back together again now.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to regroup again. Thank you. Nobody heard Claire saying, I'm hardly giving you enough time. Nobody. She's so quiet. Get it. Okay, we're going to regroup again. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to do this twice more, so I'm not very good at projecting, perhaps. So just a chance to reflect. Try and take some of those thoughts with you home if you can. Thought I'd throw in a few sayings from the church fathers and mothers. So St. Augustine seemed to know a lot about waiting because he's got a lot of quotes on the subject. That and trust. So St. Augustine said, trust the past to God's mercy, the present to his love, and the future to his providence. So when you feel like you've been waiting for a long time and unheard, I think this is really good advice. And St. Gregory, God often works by contraries, bringing strength out of weakness and turning the obstacles of life into means of grace. So I heard someone in the front row saying, but what about the trials? I think this is St. Gregory's touching on it lightly. Okay. Let's go into the second season of Moses' life. In Midian, it's a season of obscurity for him. He went from a prince to no one really. He was a shepherd. Being a shepherd for the Egyptians was a real humble job. You know, not everyone would be a shepherd. So he really went from top class to really not someone completely obscure. It was a really humbling time, obviously for that reason, but also because he lost all the luxury, the wealth, the pomp, the plan that he thought he had for his life. But it was a time when God was refining his character, really refining it. He taught him humility, he taught him patience, and leadership, but most of all, to care for others. As a shepherd, we have Jesus as an example of the Good Shepherd, and that's a real symbol of love, of willingness to leave the 99. I think God really wanted to grow that in Moses in this season, that he would never leave someone behind. Little did he know why, but he had to have that before the next phase of his life. He also became a father and a husband, again growing that heart of love, of responsibility. And it was in this season, it was in the wilderness, that Moses encountered God at the burning bush. He had a complete transformation, a complete change of direction. He grew in the opulence of Egypt around probably, I don't know, countless pagan gods. But it was in the wilderness of Midian that he got to meet the living, real God of the universe. I think that's how it is for us sometimes. When we're distracted and we're in the world and things are full and busy and, you know, everything that we think it should be, can be really hard to hear and see God. In Hosea, he talks about how he's going to allure his love into the wilderness and speak softly and beautiful words to her. Sometimes the biggest gift of a season of waiting is that we get to sit quietly in the glory of God. That is the biggest gift of waiting. But I think if we don't learn to be still and value it, that may not ever come about. We may miss out on it. So God can call us into seasons of obscurity as well to heal us. He must have been very wounded by the fact that he'd murdered someone and was called out on it. And he was called out by the people he was meant to lead. So I think it's a real blessing and a grace that when we need healing, God takes us in sort of into a private space before he promotes us in public. I really would hate to have all my healing and all the bits that are broken about me done publicly in front of everyone. If it's necessary, we accept it because we're used to saying whatever God's love allows, we will do. But what a grace and what love from God that he pulls us into a private wilderness to heal, to talk to us, to transform us bit by bit, and then ultimately in Moses' life appear to him, give him a sanctified moment in time. Big stuff, big stuff. So I think God's work in that period of his life, he taught Moses humility and patience. He prepared him practically for leading Israel through the wilderness, because he himself was in Midian. He strengthened his dependence on God rather than on his own abilities. Remember, in the first 40 years, he was used to being the boss of his own life. Now he realizes there really is a real boss, a real leader, God himself. And the verses that I just wanted to highlight to you were from Psalms: wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Commanded. Wait for the Lord. Wait for the Lord. Not for yourself. Wait for the Lord. New Testament. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Remember, someone said to me, if you don't humble yourself, you really don't want God to humble you, and he will allow that for your own good. It is better that we sort of take that bit into our own hands and I humble myself rather than be humbled. He will still do it gracefully and with love. It's better for me to bend the knee. And then the slightly more hopefully interactive bit. Again, I'm sorry, I won't give you a lot of time, but things to contemplate. Pick something that's useful for you. Seasons of waiting can be for my healing, my preparation, my pruning, my filling, and a chance to receive revelation to the nature and identity of God. Can be big things in a season of waiting. Am I willing to embrace stillness in the waiting in order to receive all these things? I really need stillness, internal stillness. What is God developing in you during a hidden season? Waiting often feels like obscurity or failure. Ask yourself, what is God teaching me about humility and trust during this time? An example that you can also leverage is David. He waited in the wilderness before becoming king, and in that time he learned to trust God and he developed his character. Again, if you don't mind, speak to a couple of people to your left or right, pick something, focus on it, and see what you have to say about it. Go. Go.
2 minutes.
I'm really sorry. I've been told that I need to be strict with the timing, so I'm gonna push through. But if I'm honest, these are probably the most important slides, the bits where we self-reflect. So forgive me, I don't give you enough time for them. But hopefully St. John Chrysostom can give us one or two things to take away. St. John Chrysostom said, The greatest power is often found in stillness. Let's find our stillness, guys. When God delays, he's not inactive. He's preparing his work in the hearts of men. So when you feel that you are in a season of delay, if you're calling it delay rather than waiting, don't worry. God is preparing his work in your heart. Okay? Best cardiothoracic surgeon there is, God, doing something in your heart. Final season for Moses was the waiting season in the wilderness with the awesome people of Israel, where they were waiting for deliverance and fulfillment. So many chapters to read, they're all highlighted there. But as we know, Moses led Israel through the wilderness, but he himself never physically entered the promised land, despite all his efforts. Moses had seen God move in such a mighty way. The 10 plagues, which actually I read not too long ago, each of the plagues was in reference to one of the pagan gods. So each god of ancient Egypt, and there was apparently many, but the 10 biggest and most famous ones, each plague reflected how they were unable to deal with that trial and that tribulation, but the hand of God would bring it onto the Egyptians. So it was a testimony to the power of God to everyone, including the Egyptians themselves. Obviously, the parting of the Red Sea, one of the most awesome moments in history, and manna from heaven. All of these things happened to save the children of Israel and many more things. But the people complained. Gosh, they complained. They were a stiff-necked people. There were moments where they really lacked faith. They would see something as amazing as the parting of the Red Sea, and yet a few days later they'd be like, oh, we wish we were back in Egypt, sitting next to the pots of meat where we had bread enough to fill our bellies. And that verse will always stick in my mind, because it didn't say that they were eating from the pots of meat. They were just sitting next to them. But they felt like they were living in abundance, in security, because it was familiar. God protect us from being like that, where we see mighty acts of God, and then 3 days later we lose all trust and faith, and we feel lost and confused and chaotic and unsure. What's the plan, God? What's next? What's next? It really should have been a 2-week journey through the wilderness, but it turned out to be 44 years. But in that time, Moses became a friend of God. He spoke to him so many times, I think hundreds of times I read. He received the law, and he had such a shining face. He had to wear a veil so not to scare the people of Israel, because he'd reflected the glory of God and from being in his presence. He was a mighty prophet and a real man of God. And like we said, he didn't enter the promised land. And sometimes we wait for a promise, but it looks very different when it materializes to what we expect. So what was God's work during this season? He developed Moses' perseverance and reliance on his guidance. He deepened Moses' spiritual relationship. Right from the burning bush forwards, he continued to develop him through constant communication, through constant relationship, through communion with him. He used Moses to raise up a new generation prepared to enter the promised land. A brave generation, maybe. And I've just added a couple of verses for you. So please remember that the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. It takes a lot of faith. Really, there's not that much for us to do. And from the New Testament in Hebrews, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. So Lord, grow our faith to be able to do those things. Oh, that is tiny. So I also just wanted to reflect that in this season, God's work wasn't just on Moses, but it was on the whole of the people of Israel. He worked through all of them. I'll pick out one or two points because it's far too small for anyone to read. He gave them a new identity. He shaped them in that trial, in that testing, in that distance from the life that they thought they were going to get. He prepared a new generation, the next generation, a much stronger generation that lived liberated, not under the weight of a broken identity of being slaves. He taught them faith in his timing. And actually, he also got them used to his presence, something that I don't put there. He was with them the whole time. And he also, I think, taught them that he is the God that provides not only their nourishment, the manna, the quail, the water from the rock, but also his physical presence. He gave them him through the law, through the pillars of smoke and light. Things that who would expect that would be what you would receive in a wilderness in a waiting season? But those are the things you can get. The last little application for us to contemplate on if you want. So, God's plans, they're always much better than my plans. His ways are higher than my ways. His thoughts are higher than my thoughts. And if I believe that, then the long seasons of waiting, they actually involve active service. For Moses, these were really years of service to his people. So if you feel like you're in a season of waiting, ask yourself, is this a time for me to serve? Is it a time for me to trust in God and do good? I shouldn't be sitting idle. I shouldn't be thinking there's nothing for me to do. There is always something for us to do in God's house and in the world. Moses grew in love and devotion. He put his people first. He told God at one point, if you don't forgive them, then blot my name out of the book of life. That is how much devotion he had for them. Am I willing to accept the seasons of waiting, even if they've got nothing to do with me and more to do with my people? So his season of waiting wasn't really about him. It was about the people of Israel. It was during his season of leadership. Can I grow in such love and faithfulness and trust in God that accept that maybe sometimes I might be in a season of waiting for my family, for my colleagues, for my church, for anything, any circle that you're in. Once you grow into a position of leadership and into your calling, your waiting probably has very little to do with you. And it should really be about those that you serve. So, for example, St. Paul, he endured so many trials, imprisonments, all sorts of crazy things. But he used that time to write letters, to pray for the church, and he was the most impactful person within the few short years that he lived. So I'm going to ask you, find someone to talk to for a minute and say, am I willing to accept that seasons of waiting may not be for me, but they may be for my service of others? If so, how does that shape my attitude towards waiting? How does that shape me? If you don't feel that's something you want to think about, then the other question is, how do we stay faithful when God's answer looks really different to what we hoped it would be? Go. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So sorry. Sorry to break your flow. I can hear amazing contemplations. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Feel free to pick it up after YRM. I'm putting this in because all of you at some point, if not now, will be in a season of leadership. Okay? Be it at your work, studies, at home, here, there will be a season of leadership. Just want to give you some encouragement from the life of Moses that sometimes when you follow your calling, it doesn't immediately mean that you're going to be seen with favor and gratitude. Okay? That doesn't mean that you're not doing what you're not meant to do, if you get my meaning. Moses really was not thanked by the people for doing all the things that he did. It was difficult. So your calling has very little to do with your comforts. And that is why sometimes God prepares you in obscurity beforehand to be able to withstand things that are quite difficult. For example, having a thankless job, but still needing to do the right thing. Being the voice of patience and reason in a difficult conflict. Being the person that brings Christ into a situation when really no one even knows who he is. You may not be thanked for it, but that doesn't mean that you're doing the wrong thing. So just a bit of encouragement when you're in this position. Sometimes it can feel a little lonely. Sometimes you need to really be clear on the vision that God has, and use Habakkuk as an example. And if you need support, which all of us do, remember that we are a family, okay? Find those that God has put around you to strengthen you. Remember these concepts. Brother is born for a time of adversity. Iron sharpens iron. A three-corded rope is not easily broken. It doesn't say go solo. It really doesn't. There's no need to ever go solo. You may stand alone, but Moses had Aaron. And just to reiterate, your calling really has less to do with you and more to do with others. So you may not see the promised land of your efforts, what you perceive to be the promised land of your efforts. We always pray to be fruitful. What I do, I want to be fruitful. I want to, have purpose and meaning and all of this. And I only realized in preparing this talk, if you imagine a tree that is really heavy with fruit, who's the fruit for? It's not for the tree. Trees don't eat fruit, do they? Fruit is for others. When you pray to be fruitful, you are praying to give to others in a spirit of service and a spirit of love. That is really the point of our lives, is to bear fruit for others. Yeah. So, Saint Teresa, God withholds what is not good for us, even when we cannot see it. And patient achieves everything. I love the confidence. Everything. St. Augustine again, I've got a soft spot for him. The times of patient endurance are the times when God perfects us and brings us closer to him. I really pray that in the seasons of waiting, that's true for us, that God perfects us and brings us closer to him. And the closer individually we get to him, we can't help it. We get closer to each other. Little summary. God is in the waiting. God is in the waiting. Be excited for your seasons of waiting because he's there. Even if we don't see it, even if we don't feel it, you can trust in it. Oh, the second one was for me, but we always say God is Alpha and Omega. So we believe, that he's put us on earth for a reason. We're created by him. We believe we're going to be with him through his grace. I think we sometimes forget he's also everything in between. He's in these seasons in between, in these seasons of waiting. You're never on your own. Waiting can be your development. It can be for your healing, for humility. It can be preparation, not punishment. God refines us before he releases us. Waiting can be extended by disobedience. Delay shouldn't lead to discouragement because we've already said all the amazing things that can happen in the season of waiting. The wilderness is never the end. It's never the end, but it's part of the journey. And sometimes waiting may not be about you. Accept those seasons and grow in love with your fellow brothers and sisters when it's not about you. Our whole lives here are a season of waiting because it's all temporary till we get to go home. We're all sojourners. So I really hope you enjoy your stay at the Four Seasons of Waiting Hotel. Please stay active. Please stay active, okay? When you're waiting, stay active. Pray, seek God, not just his answers. Seek the face of God more than his hand in your seasons of waiting. He will always provide. Trust and believe that he's faithful. Prepare. Do what you can to prepare. Use the time to grow in love, faith, skills, wisdom, whatever you think it is that you can do in that time. Stay faithful, stay serving. Even if your wilderness season seems really long, it's the best time. Stay joyful. Don't do it grumpy. No one wants to be around a grump. You don't want to be around a grump, and you have to spend all your time with you. So be joyful, because you all are. Remember, no season is wasted. God is always at work. Surrender to him, and his timing will always be perfect. And ask yourself today, am I really willing to trust God during this season? There's so many more slides that we're not going to go to because there's a minute. But St. Basil, the waiting soul grows by trust while the impatient one wilts in despair. God forbid any of your souls ever wilt. God protect you from that. Yet again, St. Augustine. God is always trying to give good things to us, but our hands are too full to receive them. Waiting empties our hands so we can receive his blessings. He's ready to give you so much. So we don't have time for the contemplation, but I had picked up on what I was going to do for it. So Moses didn't physically enter the promised land, but he got to see and be with our Lord during his transfiguration. Wow. There isn't a single promise that God gives that doesn't become fulfilled. Could he have predicted that he would be there in that moment? Could he have known during his physical life that he would be the one with Elijah to witness the awesomeness, the glory of God, to be part of that? Not only that, but to understand that it was Jesus himself who was the one to take and deliver all of humanity, not just the Israelites, to the promised land. So there is a contemplation, but I'm sorry, we've run out of time due to my poor timekeeping. But if we send out the slides, if you want, you can read it. And it's a reflection through the eyes of Moses, not only of his life and his journey through his seasons of waiting, but then what it was like for him to witness our Lord in the moment of transfiguration. So if you would like to read it, it will be there.